Welcome to the equipment section of this course where I'll be talking about what to look for when buying camera gear, and then I'll take you through my bag and show you what I've bought and why I chose to buy it. Now, one of the questions I get asked most is, what should I buy? What camera, what lens, what stabilizer, what computer to edit on? Everyone wants to know what the professionals are using so they can know how to best spend their money. And because I've spent literally hundreds of hours researching and using equipment, I have some pretty good answers to give you today. But when it comes to helping people decide what to buy, I always ask this question first. What do you plan on shooting? Because depending on what types of videos you want to shoot will depend on what camera gear I recommend you buying. So I'm going to go over some different things to look for when buying camera gear to help you decide what's most important to you for the types of videos you plan on shooting. In this video specifically, we're going to talk about the most important piece of equipment, which is the camera body. What camera should I buy? I've compiled a list of my top 7 things to look for when buying a camera. Number 1 is price. What's your budget? Decide how much you're willing to spend and look for cameras in that price range. If you're working with a low budget and you have maybe only $500 to spend, I'd probably recommend getting something simple like a GoPro Hero 4 and maybe a Go Scope to put it on. Or for about $600, you can get a DJI Osmo, which comes with a built-in stabilizer, and with both of these cameras, you can still get amazing looking footage. If you have a little bit more money and you're looking to spend between $1,000 and $2,000, I'd recommend getting a cheap DSLR like a Canon SL1, which you can get for around $400, and then spend the rest of your money on nice lenses and stabilizers, as those are just as important as the camera body. And we'll talk about those in the next videos to come. My first camera that I bought was the Canon T3i, along with a Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter lens and a GlideCam HC2000, and that combined cost me about $1,500. And with that setup, I was able to make money filming weddings, sporting events, music videos, and much more. And once I'd shot with that for a few months and had some time to save up some more money, I was looking to upgrade and spend between $3,000 and $5,000. And so I purchased a Canon 5D Mark III. If I were looking in this price range today, I'd look for a DSLR that could shoot 4K video like a Panasonic GH4 or a Sony a7S II, and again would look to invest in some nice lenses to go along with those. My current budget situation is about $10,000, and so a few months back I bought the Canon 1DC and spent the rest of my money on upgrading to more lenses. Some other cameras I'd recommend in this price range would be the Canon 1DX Mark II, which comes out in April 2016, or the Blackmagic Ursa Mini, which sells for about $7,000 total package, or the Red Raven, which sells for about $10,000 full package. Now, if your budget is even higher, more around $50,000 to $100,000, I'd recommend getting a Red Dragon or a Red Weapon, which will run you anywhere from $50,000 to $80,000. That's what I shot with for the past few years with Devon Supertramp, and it's what they use on a lot of Hollywood films like Spider-Man and The Great Gatsby. So hopefully I'll get there one day. For now, I only rent those kind of cameras when I'm doing bigger productions, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of different cameras and different price ranges that are out there right now that I would recommend buying. The second thing you want to look for when buying a camera is the age of the camera, or when it was released. And this one goes along with being smart with your money. When you find a camera you like, check when it was released. And if it was released several years ago, then check to see if a newer version has come out or is about to come out. You don't want to buy a brand new camera only to have a newer version of that camera come out a week later. So make sure you do some research before buying. Now, if your budget is low, I would recommend buying a used camera because you can get more bang for your buck. That way you can experiment with the camera, see what you like, see what you don't like. And then once you've gotten a feel for what you want in a camera, you can easily resell that for a similar price and go out and buy a brand new camera with a better knowledge of what exactly you want. So decide what's more important to you. Do you want the latest and greatest cameras that are most expensive, or do you want to save money and buy something older or used? The third thing I look for when buying a camera is the resolution. Resolution means the overall quality and size of your image, and is measured in pixels. Pixels are tiny little dots of light that combine to make up the image as a whole. So when you hear 1080p, that's referring to 1080 vertical pixels that are making up your image. And the standard in the industry right now is 1080p. So you want to make sure your camera can shoot at least 1080p, but I'd recommend, if you can afford it, getting a camera that can shoot 4K resolution, which is twice the size and quality of 1080p. 4K is more of a luxury right now, as it'll probably take 3 or 4 more years before 4K becomes the standard in the industry. But if you're like me and you want to time-proof your footage, then you're going to want to get a camera that can shoot 4K resolution. So if the overall size and quality of the image is important to you, then make sure to look at the resolution when buying your camera. The fourth thing I look for when buying a camera is the frame rates it can shoot. When reading about a camera online, it will usually tell you the resolution and the frame rate right next to each other. What that means is that it can shoot 60 frames or individual still images per second, and each of those 60 images has a resolution of 4K. So it's not just about the resolution, but how many frames at that resolution per second that it can shoot. And the reason you want higher frame rates is because high frame rates equals slow motion. The higher the frame rate, the slower motion you can shoot. 60 frames per second is a pretty standard frame rate for slow motion, and most DSLRs will have this option. If possible, try and find a camera that can shoot high resolutions and high frame rates. I bought a Sony FS700R because it can shoot 240 frames per second at 1080p, and that's the only reason I bought it. So if slow motion is important to you, look for a camera that shoots high frame rates. The fifth thing I look for when buying a camera is the sensor size. Your sensor is the part of your camera that captures light and converts it to an image. Essentially, the bigger your sensor size is, the higher quality your image is going to be. Let's take a look at a few different sensor sizes to give you an idea. Full frame is the largest sensor size that can be found on digital cameras. Examples of full frame cameras would be like the Canon 5D Mark III or the Sony a7S II. APS-C is a popular sensor size that you'll see in smaller, cheaper DSLRs like the Canon 7D or the Canon Rebel series, and is about 1.6 times smaller than the full frame sensor. The Panasonic GH4 has a micro 4/3 sensor, which as you can see is even smaller than the APS-C, and cameras like GoPros and the camera on a DJI Inspire 1 drone have a sensor size of 1 to 2.3. And like I said, the smaller that sensor is, the lower quality that image is going to be. So if your budget allows, try and buy a camera with a bigger sensor. One of the advantages of buying a full frame sensor camera is that it will display your lens at its true focal length. For example, here's a photo taken at 16mm on a full frame sensor camera, and here's the same photo taken from the same angle on the same lens, but using an APS-C camera sensor, and because the sensor is 1.6 times smaller than a full frame, it will crop in on the image by 1.6 times, making the image appear like it was shot on a 25mm lens. So if you buy an APS-C sensor camera, and you still want to get a wide perspective view that you can get with a 16mm lens on a full frame camera, then you have to buy a 10mm lens, times it by 1.6, which will give you the equivalent of a 16mm lens and give you the same field of view. So be aware that your sensor size is going to affect the quality of your image and determine the focal length of your lens. The sixth thing I look for when buying a camera is light sensitivity. This refers to how well your camera can shoot in low light situations and is measured by ISO. The higher you can put your ISO on your camera, the better it's going to be able to see in low light. When you raise your ISO, it makes your image brighter. However, it also makes the image grainier and lower quality. So, for example, my T3i could only shoot up to 6400 ISO. And when set to its max capacity, it looks super grainy and low quality. With my Canon 5D Mark III, when set at 6400 ISO, it looks a lot better than my T3i. And then my Canon 1DC, when that's set down to 6400 ISO, it looks even better than my Mark III. So if that's something that's important to you, make sure you check the camera's light sensitivity or its ability to shoot in low light situations. And the last thing I look for when buying a camera is the ergonomics. This refers to the general shape and size and weight and functionality of the camera. Is it shaped weird? Is it heavy? Is it going to fit on your stabilizers? Is it sturdy? Is it durable? Is it weatherproof? Is the screen big enough? Can it flip out? Do you want it to flip out? Are the buttons in a good order, in a good place? Do you like the menu, the way it's set up? These are all little things, but they can have a big impact on deciding whether or not you want to buy a camera. And generally, different brands of cameras will have different strengths and different weaknesses in these categories. For example, a few months back, I considered buying a Blackmagic Ursa Mini, but after realizing that it's a little too heavy and too long to fit well on a glide cam or a 3-axis gimbal, I realized it wouldn't work very well for my style of run and gun filming. So instead, I bought a Canon 1DC which is much smaller, much lighter, and it shoots a lot better in low light situations. But it doesn't shoot as high a resolution or as high of frame rates. So when buying a camera, it's always a trade-off. You have to pick and choose which attributes, which features are most important to you, and follow these simple guidelines to help you buy your next camera. If you guys have any further questions about what to look for when buying a camera, please let me know.